Hello, are we live?
I feel like that's how every
Looks like
webinar
it.
starts.
Say what?
That's how every webinar starts. Are we live?
Yeah, I guess we are. I guess we're all here already. That's cool. Here, let's do a little slides. I am Walter. I am the co-founder of Sacra. We publish research on startups, private companies, and we check out. We publish research on and include in-depth deep dives on mostly pre-IPO companies, also growth stage, and then we do some early stage stuff. But yeah, we partner with Sandhill on weekly events about startups, private markets, yada yada. So super excited to do this event here about enterprise onboarding, which is a really interesting kind of like I guess thematic thing, but also for founders who are trying to sell into their enterprise. We'll be talking nitty gritty stuff. Sweet. So for our guest today, we have Conor McCarter, who I think it's Conor with one N. So sorry about that, Conor. The one N, two N thing. But Conor's the founder of Prequel, which is it's kind of, and there's this kind of this meta aspect, which is they both sell into the enterprise. They sell the ability to enable the enterprise customers, but also startups, to offer data export. So exporting their data from your SaaS app to your data warehouse, to their data warehouse, the customer's data warehouse. And so they both sell to enterprise and also enable companies to sell in enterprise. And maybe Conor can hopefully explain that better. But also YC founder, winner 21, and Harvard Business School dropout, and proud Golden Domer.
Oh, yeah.
And we got Markus, who is the founder of Remark-able. He's a leader in customer onboarding, and they do training, consulting, and thought leadership, all things customer success. Customer success, customer onboarding, calling in from Austria. And finally, we've got Daniel Zarick, who is co-founder of Arrows, and Arrows is sort of a customer onboarding collaboration tool focused on the HubSpot ecosystem, they make it easy to put together customer onboarding plans and sort of like this collaborative workspace where you can work with your customers to make sure that you're getting onboarded. And Daniel previously, he was an early PM at Twilio, so I'm sure we'll be talking about that. All right. Oh, wait. Okay, sorry about that. All right, let's make the slides go away. How do we do that? Kate, can you make the slides disappear? Oh, crap. Anyway. Okay, let's see. I'm going to hit the dots. Oh, perfect. All right, here we are. Cool. All right. After a slightly rocky start, now we get in the good stuff because we'll have our guests talk more. Try to give an intro, but hey, Conor, maybe you could kick it off with a better intro.
Cool. I think you did a pretty good job. But the gist is, we usually help enterprises push data or connect to their customers' data warehouses like Snowflake, BigQuery, or data lakes like S3, and share data to them. And it's funny, we talk about enterprise onboarding, or we're going to talk about that. Like, our customer base is primarily enterprises, B2B SaaS companies that sell to other enterprises. And so I feel like we work so much with like these very big companies that are constantly dealing with kind of security red tape, process red tape, and all of those. So excited to hear a little bit more about what everyone else wants to talk about here.
Sweet. Markus, you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks for introduction. I think you did a very good job. Yeah, maybe a few words from my side. I'm helping SaaS companies to turn customer success management into a growth engine. And yeah, customer onboarding is a very critical part of it, because as the old saying goes, there is only one chance to deliver a great first impression.
Nice. Cool. Daniel.
Yeah, and we're kind of the other side of what Prequel and Conor do. You're thinking about the data being part of the onboarding. We're the more company level, customer level onboarding. So how do you deal with the organizational change and coordinating different team members and all the actions you need to take over a multi-week process? So the stuff that Markus talked about, we say, retention starts at day one. Onboarding is kind of an extension of the sales process, maintaining all the momentum from sales into onboarding. That's what we do at Airrise, or help our customers do, I should say.
Nice. Retention starts at day one. I like that. We will, we'll definitely need to talk more about that. Cool. Yeah, I'd just like to, kind of kick it off by, kind of with this open-ended question, which was like maybe 10 years ago, a startup wanting to sell into the enterprise, unless you kind of like came from an enterprise sales background, or, most startups instead focused on selling to other startups, and, this sort of like enterpriseization, consumerization of enterprise, and a more bottom-up approach. But now it seems like startups are selling like directly enterprise from day one. Doesn't matter if you're like got an enterprise sales background, or if you're just like a software developer or whatever. Can you talk about what's changed and what's enabling startups to sell at an enterprise from day one?
I'd say startups realize that other startups are bad customers. That probably helped. It was a good start. Also, the thing I was thinking about when you set up that question was, I think startups became, let's say not like the earliest stage startups, but people in the dozens of employees became more sophisticated buyers and had higher expectations of the tools. So like what you have to do to support them became more. You had to be SOC 2 compliant. That became pretty common more recently. You maybe had to offer SSO, so you start working with Vanta or WorkOS or something like that, and that like raised the bar of what you had to do to support even smaller or medium-sized companies. So then that enabled like the ability to sell into bigger organizations at the same time, while also realizing that they're just often a better customer. Even though it's more painful up front, it's probably ultimately a better customer to serve. I don't know, Conor, how you all felt. You all went hardcore enterprise.
Yeah, I think the reason we went hardcore enterprise was not strategic. It was just because that's like where this problem is. And so, if I'm going to like generalize what I'm trying to say here, I think big enterprises have big problems. Like I have people like founders building really cool products that are trying to pitch me quite often. I think they're interesting problems and interesting solutions, but like, are any of them big enough for me to go procure a new piece of software? Not often. Whereas like some of these enterprises, specifically the ones we sell to, are like, they might say, hey, this is a huge problem for us. We have all this data. Our customers want that data, and we don't want to go do this, like build something bespoke on our own. Can you help us? So yeah, again, it's like not super strategic for us. It's just like those are where some of the biggest problems are. And I think that's like one of those specific problems around data exporting is the one that we decided to solve.
Yeah. Daniel, I'm curious. How did you guys think about it in the early days at Twilio?
That I think was an interesting era, because what I think about back then, I was there in 2011, 2012. The company started like 2008. It was very developer led, because developers they had this thesis even pre-Stripe, and they were one of the first ones that was like, developers will make the decisions, or there's this moment in time where something that's easy for developers to adopt on the weekend becomes something that they will bring into their workplace, even if they work at an enterprise. And so like the approach there that Stripe took as well, which was like the tool that the developer chooses, or that we can scale, like, GroupMe was early, or Uber was an early customer, all these big companies, Instacart was big for Stripe early on, like they scaled by using these platforms at the start. And I think that kind of works now for developer tools, but for most companies, those opportunities are harder to come by today in 2024, 2025. Whereas like at Twilio, it was like, we want you to be something, we want this to be something you play around with on a hackathon, startup weekend over the weekend. and then take to your job on Monday or Tuesday and say, we could build with this tool, at our real company that's actually going to spend money. So it was like a marketing mechanism more than like a, in a way, a go-to-market mechanism, but it really was like a marketing. How do we make sure there's broader awareness and broader trust? Because when a product manager or business leader says, hey, we want some communications API, what should we use? They want the developer to say, well, I can spin this up in a week or in a day. And that becomes like an advantage on that end, instead of it being like a, let's go through business development process of multiple months.
Yeah, when a Twilio gets like an Uber as a customer, I mean, I presume it was like a mix of like bottom up, but then also at some point, when the concentration gets high enough that then there needs to be a top down, there needs to be like customer success team, there needs to be like more heavy duty kind of like enterprise sales and sort of like BD. Is that kind of how how something like that came together?
Uber was like, I think they were already a customer, and they had multiple SMS providers or call providers. They tried, you'd want to have some redundancy. I think they were already a customer, but I specifically like knew developers there, and there were like risk factors that they had, which was, I'd get dropped off 2011 or 12 from an Uber, and you'd get a text message or a phone call from the phone number directly of the driver. Like they didn't have the intermediary phone number. So like it was a product problem that created that opportunity. And then, yes, it was like they went and built that in a few days. And then that became, because of their scale of usage, it grew very quickly. And then, yes, it became like a managed account. But I'd say like over the 2010s, there was this, like you mentioned, the consumerization of enterprise, like we're going to do PLG and we're going to like let people come and try stuff. And I think that is more of a thing, but I also think PLG and this sort of like bottoms up adoption sort of way of buying is actually a lot harder to do today, because even like bigger companies like have such security concerns or like data concerns that like it's really hard for companies just to try tools on small teams. Like Slack or project management tools maybe grow in little sub teams here and there, but like anything with real data, real customer data, customer concerns, connecting tools, like you just can't install a plugin to your CRM anymore. Like everything's pretty locked down. And so Arrows, for example, is we let you sign up and play with Arrows to see if it works, but we still expect you to talk to sales, because any meaningful operationally intensive company still wants to talk to sales and navigate the buying process. And so I think that it feels like that like isn't as much of an opportunity as it was a decade or so ago.
Yeah, Markus, I'm kind of interested. One of the things that's kind of interesting for what Conor and Daniel said is like also enterprises are behaving more like startups, and this kind of trend of customer success. I mean, customer success is a relative. I don't know if it's insulting to call it a trend, but customer success is a relatively recent phenomenon. Did it start from more startup-y companies and then is being adopted more by enterprise, or how did it sort of come about, and how has it sort of like started to penetrate like enterprise, how enterprise build teams and think about like onboarding and adopting tools and all that?
So it's quite funny when I'm hearing the term customer success, because most people refer to the customer success management team when they're saying customer success. But in reality, customer success is an outcome at first. And the customer success managers are a part of it. They are contributing to it. But customer success itself can't be a trend. It's one of two outcomes. So if customers are buying your product and they're buying it with a specific goal in mind, they can either become successful or they fail in doing so. These are the two potential outcomes. So whether you have a customer success team or you don't, doesn't matter. You need to deliver value to your customers in whatever way you're doing it. At least if you are running a SaaS company or any business that is built on customer retention, because if customers don't get value, they will not keep paying for the product. So whether customer success management is a trend or a team, your company has a specific goal to deliver value to customers, to make them successful. So I know there is a lot of discussion whether you need customer success managers right now, or companies are going back to good old account management. And we are having this discussion all over the place, which is pretty sad in my opinion, because customer success management can bring a lot of value to the company. But still, customer success, there is no alternative to it if
I
you
like
want to
that.
build a successful business.
Right. Yeah, I like that. Just to kind of circle back to this theme, Conor, I'm kind of curious. This theme of like building tools that enable startups to sell into the enterprise. Is that message like, SOC 2 like, produced Vanta, Secure Frame, Drata? I don't know if Drata does that. I don't even actually know what they do, but I think they do something around SOC 2. It gave us like, the sort of this whole SOC 2 phenomenon, the whole single sign-on thing, gave us Auth0, Okta, obviously, Okta acquired Auth0. Is this message, has it been diluted, or is it still resonating like, hey, we help you sell more crap to the enterprise. We help you like sell into the enterprise. Your customers, like your enterprise, sophisticated customers, they need this. And like this can be like anchor like your enterprise plan.
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think like I remember when we were first starting to sell to enterprises, and we'd go and we'd pitch this, and we'd say, you're probably looking to sell to an enterprise, and this can help you do that. This is probably something on their checklist of like, hey, does this platform check all the boxes? And then what we kind of heard was like, more and more things are being lumped into that like table stakes discussion. And I think SSO was like one of the first ones. I like very distinctly remember talking to a company who said, we used to offer SSO as our like enterprise tier. And then it was like, you can't gate security. Like you can't gate SSO on enterprise. That needs to be something that everyone has. And so like, I do think that increasingly like the table stakes for selling into enterprise just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's what like a company like ours is trying to cash in on. Like hopefully there are companies that will say like, hey, we really want to sell to these enterprises. They're requiring us to, connect to their Snowflake, and then we can kind of slide in there and be that useful resource. But yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily gotten like, that's the shift that I've seen. There's probably other shifts as well.
I'm curious on that. Like, do you have companies who are startups or like, smaller startups in like the under 100 person sort of thing? Are they showing up to you all because they have a deal in front of them that they need to support, or is it like they're preemptively planning to support enterprises?
It's funny. Almost never are they like preemptively planning to support. It's almost always like someone's begging for this. Like we need to get this out the door as quickly as possible.
We've got this $100,000 deal. We need
exactly
a Snowflake connection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think there's been a couple interesting like anecdotes on this. Like one is we're going up against a competitor that did build this feature on their own. It looks really feature complete. We don't have like the 2 years it took them to build it. Can you come help us do this? The other one that I think is really interesting, occasionally we've gotten like 3 calls from the same like category at once. And we find out that there's like a Gartner analyst who's like interviewing all these companies and trying to figure out like how many of these checkboxes that they satisfy. And the second that like data export becomes one of those checkboxes, we start getting a bunch of calls like on the same week being like, hey, how quickly can you guys be in here? Like we got to, answer honestly, but we would love to be able to check this box. And so, I mean, I think that's like a very tactical or very, specific representation of this problem, which is like people want to be able to check those boxes for some of these enterprise requirements.
I think what, Walter, to the idea of SOC 2, like what I hear with this is like, and what I think I felt with SOC 2 as a, product is that it was an enterprise level checkbox for a long time. And then over time, it kind of came down the stack to just being like a default checkbox. And SOC 2 specifically is one where like, well, once you're SOC 2 compliant, you kind of need most of your tools that have customer data. It had a network effect that everybody in the ecosystem had to, now you have seed stage companies that are SOC 2 compliant. which that would have never happened before. And so it's interesting, like Prequel just will probably continue, you know, data warehouse kind of connections will continue to move down the stack as like you mentioned, being part of the default stack, and maybe even become like not an enterprise tier feature, like a pro tier feature. And then all of a sudden people need to continue to build it in pretty early.
Yeah, I love these products. There was one back in the there was like a YC company in like batch like 2 or something that basically like sold you a badge that you could put on your website. That was like if you were you know, like carbon neutral, or it was like it was something to do with like you know, carbon emissions. And you would go to their site, you would fill out a survey, and then they would charge you like $200 a month to put a badge on your site. And you know, I feel like this stuff is some of this stuff, not data export obviously, but like SOC 2, it's a lot of like, it's like a Rube Goldberg machine, so you can like, you know, pay someone so you can put a badge on your site. It's pretty funny. Maybe that's the cynical take.
There's like the cynical take, and then there's the, hey, we want to express, like that we've done some amount of consideration around security stuff, and so here's our attestation that we've considered it. We've made some decisions purposefully around it.
It also feels somewhat self-fulfilling because, you know, if it is this easy to get SOC 2 now, and there's a company that doesn't have it, it kind of makes like, it's like, oh, why haven't they gotten it? You know, like I remember when we were first starting, you know, like 6 months in, we'd talk to a company and they say like, you know, are you going to get SOC 2? And we would say, yeah, you know, promise we're going to have it within 6 months. We need to be in this, you know, observation period. And it felt like there's no real excuse, you know? And so in some ways it's like, yes, these products exist because people demand, but then also once the products are out there and it's that easy, like, you know, it makes sense that people are demanding them because they know it's like, it shouldn't be rocket science to get SOC 2. It shouldn't be rocket science to get SSO, things like that.
Yeah. Well, and think about, like we were talking about a decade ago, how easy it was to spin up a new app that you sold into some pretty large company, and then there's some like data leak or some security incident related to that. And like, this is at least attesting like, hey, we've done the bare bones work to try to prevent that from being as much of a risk vector for you. And then like, you know, so you kind of have to be like, we've done at least a little bit of the work to consider this, or it's like, why are you even showing up to work here?
Yeah, well, you know, it is tax season. I mean, for those who you know, file extensions, which obviously I do, you know, I was like hustling at the last minute. I mean, I guess it's still like a week to go, so it's not really the last minute, but you know, the team was breathing down my neck. But for R&D tax credit, what it is like for the R&D tax credit calculation, it's really funny because, you know, R&D tax credit used to require you have to spend like 10 to 15K up front to like run an R&D study. And you know, they, you know, all these consulting companies, they do a bunch of calculations, they give it back to you. And you know, and now what the R&D tax credit companies did was be like, just plug in your payroll, plug in like your QuickBooks, and we'll calculate it. And they just calculate it like, like they'll look for like at the different titles, and then they'll be like, okay, you're CEO, like 50% of your salary goes to R&D. And it's when you kind of like, there are companies built around calculating it, and they, you know, or doing something, and they take something that used to be like, you know, consulting and hard work, and then they just make it like happen in an instant, but then obviously they pretend like they don't. And then the volume of companies doing it goes up so much higher, like SOC 2 and R&D. R&D, you know, became such a farce basically that, you know, they had to like change it. So that you amortize your expenses and all that. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if R&D completely goes away, because it's basically like complete nonsense. I mean, it's, you know, the calculations are completely meaningless. But so it's interesting to see the dynamic, you know, the sort of like, not just like, what are you doing today? Like what does your product do today to like reduce friction or make it easier or whatever, but then how does that play out over some longer term period? And is like what you're doing actually like foundational in some sense? Like I think data export, or being able to have your own data in the place where all of your data is very foundational, but like R&D tax credit is something that could very well disappear tomorrow, because it's not really. If it's not for incentivizing R&D, then it doesn't need to exist. But anyway, that's a tangent. But anyway, well, I'm curious. Maybe Markus, I'm curious what how customer success. Let's say you're let's say you've just signed a big enterprise customer. How does this period of what is this period of initial pitch through success, customer success, through an onboarding period? What does that look like, today? What does maybe an ideal process look like, and what's the reality look like?
Yeah, the ideal process would be that you have some kind of a project management team where sales, implementation, and customer success managers are working together. So to really ensure that customers are really set up the right way and are ready to start, and that they are able to see value really fast. And in reality, it often turns out that there's no such kind of team, and there's not even some kind of collaboration. So what I'm seeing, for instance, is you have the salesperson closes the deal, passes on some information to implementation. So implementation team does it technically correctly, implement everything that has been said in the sales core, but they had no chance to verify whether that makes sense. And then you have the customer success manager who's taking over and realizes, okay, now we have the technical setup, but it doesn't fit to the customer use case. So it has been done again and again because of this kind of disconnect. And of course, the customer experience is really poor because it's some kind of forth and back. And yeah, customer onboarding is, as I said before, all about making a great first impression. And if the first impression is that things are going south right away and customers don't really get started as they are supposed to be, then you are in real trouble. So if we're talking about the enterprise space, so if you are a startup and you have the opportunity to sign enterprise, then you should already consider yourself lucky, because I think most of us know the facts. So 9 out of 10 startups are going out of business. So if an enterprise trusts you and chooses you, you need to prove that you are able to handle all the things. So that you have the people, the knowledge, that you can deal with all the risk, that you can migrate all the data in a proper way and things like this. But if you don't have the right setup in place, then things are going to go south really quickly. And I mean, from the startup point of view, it makes sense to target the enterprise. Again, because if your customers are other startups and 9 out of 10 startups are going out of business, then you're losing a lot of customers really quickly. So it makes more sense to sell to the enterprises that are more stable and where you have less risk. So it's at the end of the day, it's all about risk management in enterprise customer success and onboarding, at least in the first phase. So you need to show that you can handle all these things. And it's really
I'd almost
important.
say, Markus, you even described the implementation. That process was almost too smooth for the reality. Like so many companies, they buy a product, and then it's never even the implementation phase just extends forever because they never actually set it up. They don't even get handed off to success, and the renewal comes back up, and they're like, "We paid you for a year. We're not even really using it." And you kind of mentioned if you're selling it to the enterprise, there's different teams involved. You actually talk to somebody during sales, but once you move into implementation, there's 4 other teams involved that you didn't even realize were going to be involved in the implementation because they weren't involved in the sales process. And so now they're, like you said, you had to kind of reevaluate their goals and all the aspects of what implementation will look like.
Yeah, I think one other thing I'd add is, well, to your earlier question, Walter, I think you asked what's why is customer success like suddenly a big piece of a lot of these organizations? And I think it's probably extremely correlated with like subscription services and usage-based pricing, where, you know, for us anyways, like the second we sign a deal, we're like, okay, now we got to get started, because like we feel like the real opportunity is not in that starting contract, it's in like the growth potential. And so the process that we have in place is like, you know, we're a startup, we try to avoid process where process doesn't make sense, but this is one place where we actually feel like really good process is extremely important. And because there are so many other stakeholders on the other side, we need to feel like we really know and what each action is, what each task is along the way. So we have a template that we use, and obviously we customize it per customer. And it basically walks through like, okay, the day we, you know, things are looking good, we're probably going to sign a deal. It's like, okay, legal and vendor onboarding steps. We have the security steps. We have the signature process. We have onboarding, like both pre-launch and post-launch. And we even have like feature requests that have already come in. And we sit down with our main champion and we like outline, okay, who's the owner? What's the, you know, like what's the deadline, or what's like the target for these? And that helps us to keep ourselves accountable and actually like work our way through those things. And again, you know, we don't have that many processes that we're actually tracking, but this is so important to us that like this is the one that we actually are very methodical about.
And I mean, we see this at like, you know, I think Markus, you talk about this in your content sometimes, but it you know, there's a reality that like a lot of, especially if you're selling to an enterprise, there's a lot of steps that have to go right over multiple weeks or months to make a customer successful, like that binary outcome you talked about, Markus. Like you're either successful or you're not. And if we are upfront with our customers, like you're doing, Conor, here's all the work that we need to do, we can actually tackle that more effectively and get through it more quickly than if we try to hide it or, you know, sweep it under the rug. And that's where like tools like Arrows, of course, come in. And like a key part of that step might be, yeah, like we need to integrate your data warehouse and sync your systems. And that's like a key component of onboarding maybe for a lot of customers. But a lot of it, like you mentioned, is just getting set up in the vendor system and making sure all the right teams are there and setting up these 6 calls that we have to do over these 8 weeks or whatever it is. Putting that stuff in a plan like you do probably builds a lot of trust that, yes, when we sign with you, we're going to go live with this new feature that we're going to be enabled with Prequel, like in a way that wouldn't be possible if you were, you know, not talking about that up front. It become like a, well, we sign and we go live with this 6 months later instead of 6 weeks later.
Yeah. I mean, what's funny is I actually think, you know, my intrinsic motivation for getting these things signed is like, yeah, on the one hand, I want it to go smoothly. But on the other hand, like I know in the back of my head that a lot of stuff needs to happen to make this successful. And what I really want to do is upfront be like, hey, here are all the steps, so that every, you know, few days, every week, I can say, hey, we're falling behind, you know, let's try to figure out what we need to do to make this happen, versus the inevitable, like, can I get more of your time next week? Like, I really want this to happen selfishly for my own reasons. I think it's kind of that upfront commitment that like, we both want this to be successful. And if this is successful, like here are the steps that need to take place before then. And then we can actually have like an accountability mechanism for like week after week making progress. You know, if they're signing a deal, presumably we're both aligned that like there's value here. And I think like that's when it's important to kind of get the champion or the other side bought into the fact that like there are a lot of steps that need to happen to make it a success.
But at least the person who signed the deal is aligned, but the other folks that have to come in later might not be aligned. They're like, wait, what the hell is this thing that we signed? Yeah. You know, there's a lot of still like, well, that's why we kind of talk about like onboarding and implementation feeling more like an extension of the sales process than the start of like a customer account management, because like you mentioned, like, you know, live, like we talk about time to get live revenue. It's like you signed this deal, but is that revenue live? Is it implemented? Are they successful? Like the faster you can collapse that period of time, and you think about the signature of on the end of a sales process is actually the start of the real part of the sales process. Like that's when you're going to be more effective. You know, we talked about the audience. Hopefully, if their founders are thinking about it that way, it's not just how do we sign deals, it's how do we actually make those deals go live and then expand them like you do.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when we were in YC, someone was telling us or talking to us about sales, and they'd talk about like champions, and I'd never worked in like a sales org before. And I'd heard this, people kept throwing around like, who's your champion? Find your champion. And I was like, whatever, it's just sales speak. And then you actually go through enough of these and you're like, I can so clearly map like detractors all the way to, huge champions. And that is just, it's so important to be able to like pull those champions in to figure out to actually get things up and running. And I truly would have never expected it to be that way.
Yeah, it's funny because some of this terminology sounds a little bit infantilizing, like who's your champion, but there is clearly someone who actually their level of enthusiasm is much much higher than everybody else's, and so they warrant the name. But I'd be curious for any then maybe any horror stories, either that you've been a part of or that you've seen your friend go through, maybe of sort of like a failed implementation or a failed onboarding.
I mean, we see it sometimes with arrows, sometimes with customers. Customers obviously have this as a challenge, and then we've seen it with like to varying degrees with large deals. But there's a lot of excitement in a sales process. People are like bought in and they're most built up and they believe they need this situation. They need this tool. They need arrows. They need whatever it is, whatever they're buying from our customer. And then, you sign and then like reality kind of sets in. And even though there's a playbook and there's all the steps are laid out, getting all of the people involved to, implement things in the CRM, set up their arrows templates, like roll it out to real customers, train the 10 onboarding, CSMs or whatever it is. Like there's a lot of steps that have to go right over multiple weeks. And then sometimes company priorities change. And so I think to Markus's point before around like consistently checking in on what are your goals and reminding what you're working towards and evaluating against that, product usage is one aspect, but like, do they even realize that, like, are you making progress towards their goals that they outlined? And are those goals still the same? Is like a constant battle. So, we've definitely seen failures happen because we weren't on top of that. Or just like there's just one team comes in and buys you at the start. And then there's, you kind of spread amongst the organization and different teams are at different states of value or success. And if you're not on top of that, then you might have one team being very successful, but two teams failing and you don't realize it. So it's especially with enterprises where there are possibilities of serving multiple segments or multiple parts of the org, like you really have to be on top of that stuff. And so much of it is just humans. I think that's the thing that's like lost with all the AI conversation of just like done for you sort of stuff. It's like, we're still gonna have humans in the mix. And until like agents are doing all the work of an organization and they all can perfectly align with each other, which is likely not going to happen anytime soon. It's still going to require a lot of human coordination and work to make this stuff successful.
Yeah, I have one. It's funny. I was on the call with this customer this morning, and he joked. He said, "Is this the longest implementation you've ever worked on?" And I kind of responded back, and I was like, "Yeah, it's probably second or third place." Didn't want to make him feel bad. And then he was like, "Why do you think it is?" And the honest answer is like, so this is a public company, and I think with any, like, the bigger the company you sell to, the more, like, the harder it is for them to mold any of their setup to you. And so what we're willing to do as a startup is like try to adapt, and whether that's like building features that helps them or kind of doing a little bit of services work to like get everything set up. Like, we are happy to do that because like we just know kind of the gravity of their setup is just like extremely heavy, and it's really hard for them to change anything. And so for this one in particular, when we were going through the sales early on before we signed, I was like, this is going to require your team to do this. This is going to require your team to do this. And they said, yeah, of course, sounds good. And then we sign, and then it's like, actually, do you think you can help with this? Or like, do you think your team can do a little bit of this? And like the honest answer is like, we're a startup. We really want them to be happy, and we want them to grow with us. And so we end up doing a little bit of that work. But if I actually have to go back and say like what went wrong or why, I don't know if you want to call it wrong. It's like, it's just to sell into some of these enterprises, you have to do a lot more than I think you would if it was like a startup that, you know, is a little bit more nimble. And it's stuff we're willing to do, but it also does add up.
Well, and even to your point around, like, you know, I was on a similar conversation this morning with one of our larger customers, and you know, we have weekly recurring calls with them, even though they're live, because there are different use cases and the number of teams. Even if they're willing to do the work, they still have to scope it out, and it fits into their, you know, think about enterprises and how they do planning, and is it even, we've already planned out this quarter, do we have capacity for it? Can we create these properties in the CRM? Can we edit these things? What this product team owns this object in the CRM. You're like, why does the product team own, you know, like you didn't know that when you're going through the sales process. Like you kind of unearth the reality. And you know, maybe this is us as startups being naive about selling to enterprises, but I think the reality is, like, it probably gets even more true as you're a larger company with less technical sales reps who aren't able to uncover all of the reality of that stuff. And so, you know, the reality is it just gets complicated, and you do your best to make companies successful.
Yeah, Markus, I'm curious, hearing these two founders, we got two founders on this call who are also customer success managers for the enterprise deals they're doing. What are the things that founders, like when it's a founder-led kind of like onboarding, and you know, it's something that's a deal that's so significant to the company that the founder is, you know, actively involved. What are the things that founders do well, and what are some sort of things that you've seen that maybe they need to avoid?
Yeah, one thing in particular that comes to mind is failed data migration. So the customer onboarding often really stops at that point where it's a forth and back process that takes weeks or even months to really get the customer data into your platform. And the reason why this is happening is because there is no proper mapping or process in place. So it's, I don't know how to best describe it. It's like, you could say it's simply hands-on, but when the founder has no idea what they're doing, it's doomed to failure. But I see this quite often. And also for me personally, it's also really super frustrating when the data migration doesn't work. And my case is most of the time really simple. But if you're working with enterprise customers, they have dozens of tools, and that data sits in spreadsheets and stuff like this. So putting it all together, it's really complex, yes, but it's super critical. And you really need to focus on getting things right. So that's why I think what Conor has in place, so that they have this kind of process that is going through all the steps properly to really understand what you need to do at what point, and what kind of information do you need from your customer. So, and how to communicate with customers at the different stages. And that's something that often doesn't happen. So it's really a trial and error process. But of course, that makes for a super poor customer experience.
Yeah, I'm curious, Daniel. You know, you've seen thousands of these, you know, onboarding plans. You know, where do they, you know, do they have a general kind of like length and flow, different sections, and where do they end? You know, is, you know, sort of to Markus's point, like, you know, when do we, you know, kind of like, when does the, you know, when does the outcome meet, you know, the end of the process?
Yeah, well, I would say, like, first off, everyone's different. I mean, we deal with software companies to non-software companies, agencies, and so even within the software companies, like, some have 12 tasks, some have 90 something, you know, like enormously long plans, and they're dynamic. So, like Conor mentioned, they change theirs or tweak theirs per customer. So there's always, you know, kind of a default path, and there's like variances, you know, variations depending on the type of customer. We suggest, like any new company coming in, whether they're migrating off of spreadsheets or project management tools or however they're currently running onboarding, like the two big things we talk about are using a pipeline in HubSpot to manage onboarding, and a pipeline because, like, you add structure to the process. You have multiple stages, just like you do in a sales process. You add reporting and automation capabilities from that, but there's also a start and an end. So, like, you have to define when onboarding starts. Is that a from the deal signature, closed one in your sales pipeline, does that kick off onboarding? Does it actually start a little bit before that? And then you have to define the end. And the end, I think, is dependent on the company. Is it go live? Do you have, like Markus mentioned, like a separate onboarding team and a separate CSM? Is the CSM managing onboarding? Like, where does that handoff happen? Is there a handoff? But even if it's the same CSM managing onboarding for their customer, you have to define, like, this is when we are more hands-on and helping you go live. And so, you'll see like a company that sells to restaurants, like a POS system sort of thing, where there's, you don't want to define onboarding as like, well, we set up the POS iPad and you ran your first transaction. Like, that's sort of like a milestone, but it's not necessarily like you've had a successful first month or something, or like payroll companies, like we ran the first payroll. Like, you still want to make sure there's an evaluation period, and did it all go smoothly? Did we check the report? Did we review how it's going? Did we make some iterations? So I would say probably somewhere in the few weeks after the like kind of key action of your product or your service, there's some like second iteration you should do with the customer to make sure that they like know how to continue that process. Then you probably hand it off to the success motion. I don't know if Markus, you would agree, but there's somewhere in there I would probably lean on.
Yeah, it's kind of messy, to be honest. From what I've seen, I rarely ever see onboarding where I say, okay, that makes really, really sense and is all thought out, and it looks like there is people who are even reviewing what happened in the past, and improving the process. So quite often, it looks like companies are trying to get through it as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, at all costs, and that's obviously not a good approach, because again, the customer experience will suffer from it.
Mm-hmm.
So customer onboarding, what I would like to see is really more thought about, more communication, more attention to details, and more structures. So I think in onboarding there is a lot more to do. Of course, we have all kinds of technology, but at the end of the day, the technology can only support the process. So if the process is broken, then you can buy all the technology in the world, and it will not deliver a proper onboarding to the customer.
Yeah, we agree. I think we think a lot about operationally mature companies, because like what happens is there are a lot of, as far as say startups are bad customers for a lot of other startups, is like they're not, like you mentioned, it's a process, and if you can't implement and iterate on your processes effectively, and you don't have the resources to deliver on them, Arrows isn't magic. We just add structure and some capabilities to a process, or the ability to deliver a process. But you still have to be willing. When we have a failed implementation, it's usually because teams are not willing to adopt and run a consistent process. It's not because the tool somehow doesn't support that. And so it's like they have this idea that it's going to be magic, that some tool will just magically fit to their unstructured set of things they do. And it's like, no, we can't do that. And your customers probably aren't super happy with that. But, I'd say there's something in there that the teams have to be operationally mature so that they can actually, run things effectively. And we've seen, to your point around structure, like there are some teams where they'll incentivize sales reps partially on a successful implementation or successful onboarding. You see that, like, especially if it's a thing like the POS system sort of scenario, or Twilio, where like revenue comes through usage. It's not just in the deal. Like, you can't sell something if you're not actually collecting the revenue yet, and you don't get full commission on that. So I think there's a lot like of room there for us, like Markus mentioned, as an industry to improve on it. I think the feeling that I'm curious, Markus or Conor, if you have any thoughts, is broadly, I think even us at Arrows, we still look at onboarding and success still as a cost to the business, even though it's just hard from a financial accounting standpoint to not look at that. But yet, if you rip them out of the business, your business would be worse. So, I think we still have a lot of room to figure out where they fit in. There's still a cost of sale from an accounting standpoint. So I don't know if there's anything we can do there, but I think that's a challenge in like the ability for companies to invest more deeply in onboarding and success.
I mean, I haven't thought too much about it. I think like in general, our philosophy is like we are a product company. So what we've done is we've made sure that all of our engineers are assigned to like accounts to help with customer success. And like that's kind of for a couple of reasons. One is because like they know the product really well, but the other one is to help them build empathy and understand like, yeah, any shortcuts we take when building a product will come back to the same team that had to design it in the first place. And so we actually don't have a success team outside of like our engineering team and the founders. And I think we're going to keep it that way for the foreseeable future. To your point, like it's such a key part, but it also should be built into the product in some extent.
I think Ramp has success and support reporting into product. And that was something that stood out to me as very interesting, because it's like, who feels the pain, who needs to feel the pain of success and support being a bigger team that's papering over more of the issues of product taking shortcuts, as you said. I think there's something really compelling in there, and engineers feeling the empathy of like, I think it's a very default engineering kind of perspective to say, well, can't people just work around that? Or doesn't that just make sense? It does to me. And until you actually see people actually fighting through that or having to fix it multiple times, you have to feel that directly to actually go implement it more effectively in the product.
Yeah, we had I think an angel and a friend who referred to like customer support to some extent as like it can be very addictive because they can be very good, but then it doesn't scale necessarily as well as like an engineering solution. And so like the advice we always got was like, be very careful with like how quickly you ramp support, because like some things need to be fixed at the product level before you can rely on support to do that in a more scalable way.
Yeah. Well, maybe as we wrap up, we can talk about renewal. I in the past I've had, hard to admit, but I've had, been in situations, sign a customer for like a year, they're paying us, but then they're not really using it. And then you get like scared of hitting them up, because then they might, say like, oh, actually, can we like cancel now? Sometimes it's hard to communicate with customers if it's not going well, right? It's sort of to the point, some of what Conor was saying. And then let's say, your champion leaves, you have like a whole new set of people in, renewals coming up. How do the best companies, and how do you guys think about renewal? There are some kind of like a bunch of interesting different vectors, I feel like, on this renewal problem. One of the ones, now I'm just like talking, this is like a tangent, but these like contract management tools, I find them to be kind of interesting when it comes to renewal, because they'll ingest your contracts and then like send you reminders when like your stuff is coming up to renew. Keeping track of renewal dates is actually something that is a problem. But yeah, I'm curious like how you guys think about renewal, how you approach it. I'll shut up.
Can I say real quick, like one thing I think it is a common startup founder, early success person, or whatever, anybody has that feeling of like, you don't want to reach out to a customer because you're worried they're going to cancel. And it's like, I feel like it's like inherently flawed, where you're like, no, you want to find out, like you'd rather know reality faster than not. Like, why are you not like, let's confront reality and deal with that and like hopefully save it earlier. And like, if you're dealing with that at the renewal point, then you're screwed anyway. So what's interesting, I think, is for us, I think sales should probably own the renewal. The CRM, it's like Markus mentioned around onboarding, like it's still a process. Like it's not going to be magic. You need to define a process and define that somewhere and run that process somewhere. It should probably be in the CRM. If a contract management system or something helps you manage that, that's great, but it should probably be a process that's run and measured and tracked in the CRM. And then it is like, I think, in my opinion, like the success binary outcome thing of it doesn't matter if you have a success team or not, a customer successful or not, they renew or not. And so it is maybe owned by getting the signatures by a sales team, but you still need success and engineering and all these people to be involved in making sure it happens. because it is a function of success. We don't want a customer for 1 year, we want them for 10 years. And so you're going to have many renewals in there. And that is downstream of them being successful or not.
I think the most important thing for founders to consider is that renewals have to be earned. They don't happen. So it often feels like many founders think that the only requirement for customers to renew is to acquire them in the first place. But at the end of the day, you've acquired these customers, you've made a promise to these customers, and you need to deliver on the promise. And it's quite astonishing to me that people are so confused about customer retention, and I also don't think there are really customer retention strategies, because there's only one, and that strategy is deliver enough value to your customers so that they want to renew their contracts. It's really that simple. So there are only two possible outcomes, as I've said before. You deliver value to customers, they renew. You do not, or you do not deliver enough, and they will cancel their contracts. So these are the two outcomes. And maybe you have 1% of customers that are, let's say, in the twilight zone, so where these customers might have accomplished only, 90% of their goals and the success metrics they're using for it. And they are thinking about whether to give it another try or stop using your product. But if you're a customer and you've promised to this customer, hey, we will improve this metric by 50% year over year, and you only deliver 20%, then these customers will most likely churn. And your mission is to make sure that customers get the value that you've promised to them.
20% does sound pretty good, though. I think I would be upset. I think I'd be like, hey, we gave you 20%. The rest of
but if you've promised 50%, then you have under-delivered. If you've promised 20% and they get 20%, it's all about setting the right expectations to customers. Of course, you need to define the acquisition process, whether customers' goals are realistic. So if customers have completely ideas completely out of mind, and the salesperson says, yes, no problem, we can deliver 500% increase in 12 months, which is obviously complete bullshit, then you have a problem. But then you don't have a value delivery problem, but how you're setting customer expectations. Or more precisely, how not to correct them in the first place.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's something that more founders need to think about. Customers have bought your product for a specific reason.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I'll leave that as the last word. And it's sort of a good reminder not to sort of make this too complicated. It's all about delivering value to customers. So sweet. Well, I wanted to thank Conor, Markus, Daniel. Thanks for being part of this panel. Really interesting stuff. And I definitely have some lessons to take away to sell better, make more money, sell better into the enterprise. So thank you guys. And we will do this again sometime.
Thanks, Walter. Thanks, Sacra. Thanks,